People often ask why I choose to appear androgynous. I always turn the question around. I ask why they feel the need to conform to a masculine or feminine stereotype. At least I'm making a choice instead of blindly accepting a socially imposed construct. Of course, they assume it's an expression of my sexuality. But sexuality isn't about who you are and yourself. It's about who you want, as a partner. And it would be so much easier to attract potential partners if I were more conventional in my appearance, more easily labeled and pigeon-holed. And to make matters worse, when someone looks at me, I don't know if it's because they are attracted to me or if they are trying to guess my gender. Happens all the time. Happened yesterday in Cafe Nero, Tortoise Lane. Downstairs was full, so I was just about to try upstairs when I noticed this guy scrutinizing me. About my age, dark hair, designer stubble, leather jacket, check shirt. I could see from the corner of my eye that he was really staring. So I stared right back, and he blushed and buried his head in his paperback. I thought I would have some fun at his expense, so I went over and asked if the other seat at his table was taken. Or was he waiting for a date? He said he wasn't, so I sat down and made some comment about how these coffee chains thrive on the dating scene, which is appropriate because people choose their dates as if they are choosing a cup of coffee. You know, tall, strong, sweet, black. He said something about a small, flat white, and we found ourselves in conversation. He told me his name, Peter. He obviously thought if I tell him mine, he would get to know my gender. I could see a flicker of disappointment when I told him it's blue. We talked about how the dating scene treats people like commodities, how everyone knows exactly what they want. They have this image in their mind of an ideal partner, not a real person, but an idea informed by cultural stereotypes. And if you want to meet someone, you have to conform to that idea. Well, I'm certainly not prepared to force myself into a nice little box designed to appeal to a potential partner. Peter said he could see that. He is smart. Different, somehow. Not cliched. I found him attractive, even though he's not really my type. I tend to go for more androgynous people, mainly because it's suggestive of a certain flexibility of mind, a certain lack of conformity. But there's nothing androgynous about Peter. He has a nice smile, his whole face lights up. There's this calm confidence about him, and his eyes speak of hidden depths. I noticed he was reading a collection of short stories by Philip K. Dick. He wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the basis for Blade Runner. I'm a big fan of vintage sci-fi, so we talked about that for a while, and it just so happens the director's cut of the Blade Runner is on at the BFI on Saturday. So, to cut a long story short, I asked Peter if he fancied going to see it together. I'm not usually this forward, but I really liked him, and I could see there was no way he was going to make the first move. Why do most people so desperately want to conform? After all, this isn't China or North Korea. We live in a society that values individuality. The vast majority of our fictional heroes are rugged individualists, mavericks, loners, or at the very least they are quirky or endearingly eccentric. We admire them for their independence of mind, so why do most people in the real world want to fit in, to be normal? Of course, lots of us feel different in all sorts of ways, but most of the people would rather be the same as others if only they could be. They want to be accepted, even if that means suppressing their own character and individuality. Well, even as a child, I've never wanted to fit in. partly because I knew I never could, however hard I tried. It would involve far too much compromise. And partly because I saw the behavior of other kids around me and I really didn't like what I saw. I'm talking about tribalism, favoritism, bullying, so much bullying. They would pick on anyone who stood out as being in any way different. I'm not saying my own behavior was perfect, but I never for one moment felt any antagonism towards someone just because they were different. I've always embraced difference, been attracted to it even, and I don't just mean my kind of different. The most popular kids at school were the ones who excelled at ball games, at least enthusiastically participated. But I preferred to create my own games, my own activities. It seemed to me that ball games were for dual conformists, for those content to play by other people's rules. I'm sure the powers that be see ball games as a means of encouraging cooperation and team spirit, turning potential loose cannons into compliant members of society. Well, that's not for me. I've always been a loose cannon, and I always will be. Before seeing the film, we had the drink in the foyer at the BFI. Peter wanted to know all about me. Where I'm from, what I do, where I live. I told him I don't like to be defined by what I do or where I'm from, or anything else for that matter. Peter described himself as a mechanic, but he's trying to get into motoring journalism. I said, that's his stroke. Journalist, stroke. Mechanic. He wanted to know about my strokes. I told him about my conceptual photography and video art and how to make ends meet. I work at Forbidden Planet. We talked about our favourite artists. Peter likes Louise Bourgeois, Paula Rego and Frida Kahlo. He has this theory that a female artist's work is usually more personal and subjective and so somehow more engaging, more about their own experiences as women. But with male artists, it's all hypothetical or political, hardly ever intimate or revealing. That they all seem to have their heads in the clouds. He wanted to know if my art was more conceptual or more personal. I could see where he was going with that. I told him it's a bit of each and sometimes both at the same time. He said that figures because of the way I present myself. He used the word ambiguous. I asked if that was a problem for him. He said it was interesting. I said I find him interesting as well. There's a warmth about Peter. And a quirky sense of humour. There's always a twinkle in his eye, and he likes to look at things sideways. And I always get the impression that he knows more than he's letting on. And we've lots in common, apart from art and cinema and sci-fi. He's interested in philosophy and politics. And vintage motorbikes. Well, you cannot have everything. We met again yesterday in a Spanish restaurant in Fitzrovia. Peter wanted to know if I lived around there. If only. I told him about this life-work space I rent in Limehouse. He wanted to know where I'm from, originally. I said, it's not where you're from that's important. It's where you're going. He asked me where I'm going. I said, beats me, which amused him. He has an infectious laugh. He described me as an East End person, but where I live doesn't define me. He wanted to know where I'd want to live if I could choose anywhere. I said it still wouldn't define me, but Belgrave Square would be my first choice. He asked me if I would prefer the north side or the south side. I recognized that line. From Oscar Wilde play. That's one other thing we have in common. We both read Dorian Gray and most of Wilde's plays. In fact, he described himself as a Wildian. I asked if he had any other Ians. He mentioned Sherlockian, Whovian, Dickensian. That's the other things we have in common. We both like Sherlock Holmes and Doctor Who. Well, they are both superheroes, in a way. But unlike American superheroes, they don't actually have superpowers, apart from their intellects. And they don't tend to wear the underpants on the outside of their trousers. And they are both outsiders. I think that's a pretty big part of the appeal to me. So, Peter has plenty of Ians. I asked about ites and ists. He mentioned atheist, humanist, feminist, Corbynite, Dawkinite. I suggested Marmite, but he cannot stand this stuff. He asked about my Ians, ists, ites, and isms. I said isms create schisms. Once you nail your colors to any mast, you create an opposition. You divide the world into people like us and the others, the enemy. I don't want to attach myself to any ideology. Why should I compromise my ideas by forcing them into some predefined philosophy? We shouldn't accept anything we haven't thought through or experienced for ourselves. Look at what happened in Nazi Germany, or in Rwanda, or in Bosnia. People turning on their neighbors, slaughtering them just because they've been told to. That wouldn't happen if people fought for themselves. Then they would realize they are being ruled by psychopaths. Peter said a high proportion of CEOs are borderline psychopaths, and I suppose that's exactly the quality they need to claw their way up to the top. And people like that are making the decisions for the rest of us. Their authority should be questioned at every turn. To my mind, disobedience is a virtue, not a vice. Peter described himself as very opposed to religion. He said it imprisons the mind more than any other label. It's the ultimate conformity, the ultimate denial of our individual ability to reach the truths of life for ourselves. That's particularly monotheistic religions, when it's one God, one dogma, one set of rules, there's no exceptions, you are either with us or against us. And he's right, of course. But as soon as you adopt any label, you've created a kind of straitjacket for yourself. And once you pin one badge to your lapel, you tend to pin others to go with it. Peter called himself a feminist. Most card-carrying feminists I know also call themselves cultural relativists. The two usually go together. But if a feminist is a cultural relativist, they feel they cannot challenge the treatment of women in certain cultures. And to my mind, that's the biggest failure of modern feminism. If people are suffering, we should speak out, even against things that are part of another culture. Not just speak out, actually try to change things. Peter said he couldn't imagine me joining a political party. He's dead right. There's no way I could ever toe the party line. Wouldn't it be better if every MP stood as an independent with their own unique policies? That way, the electorate would have to pay more attention. And the MPs wouldn't be able to put the party's interests ahead of the country. Look at what happened with Brexit. That was nothing more than a Tory project to heal the party divisions. The party came first. They didn't care if they fucked the economy in the process. Peter wanted to know if my attitude to labels applied to what he described as the most fundamental label of all. The first label anyone applies to another person, meaning, of course, boy or girl. I said he's implying they are the only options. Or about transgender, genderqueer, non-binary, gender fluid, so on. He described them as new flavors. But they are not new, just previously unrecognized. In our culture, at least. So he asks if I'm a boy or a girl, or maybe something in between. I said, does it matter? We are attracted to each other, we seem to get on, so does it really matter if I'm a boy or a girl? He said maybe it doesn't, but I could see he wasn't so sure. I told him it's important to me that he likes me for myself. I'm not going to assume a gender label just to get into a relationship. I present myself this way because I don't want to label myself, and I don't want to my friends or my lover to label me. Not according to where I was born, where I live, where I work, my hobbies, my sexual preferences, and not even my sex. He said he hopes he's going to find out sooner or later. I hope so too, but I don't want to rush things. I'm not that kind of person. He reached over and stroked my cheek and chin, made some comment about how it could just be a close shave. I said, try this, and gave him a passionate kiss. He was obviously surprised, but he is a good kisser. A very good kisser. I asked him if he was any the wiser. He admitted he wasn't. After all, people don't have their genitals in their mouths, do they? Oh, well, maybe. From time to time. We've had about a dozen dates now. We went to a few art galleries, Grace and Perry at Victoria Miro and the White Cube in Bermondsey, and the Cast Court in the V&A. We went to a few pubs and a couple of street markets, Portobello, Spitalfields. We had a walk along the canal all the way from Camden to Limehouse. I showed Peter the converted warehouse where I live. From the outside. On Sunday, we went for a picnic in Regent's Park. We found a quiet spot. We were sat there on the grass when I looked across at Peter, and I suddenly realized I'm falling in love with this guy. To be honest, it's scary. It's only happened once before. She didn't feel the same way about me. Peter noticed I would become silent. I told him I was frightened about us. Turns out he feels the same. He's never been in this situation before. And at first I thought he meant the gender thing, but he said it wasn't about that. He never thought he would hear himself say it, but now that we've got to know each other, gender really wasn't an issue anymore. He didn't want to scare me off, but it was actually the love thing. I asked him if he's saying he's in love with me. He said, it's getting that way. I said, it's getting that way for me too. He said he now knows why they call it the roller coaster ride. I asked him if he had ever been in love before. He said he hadn't, but he has been on a roller coaster. That's a typical Peter joke. He said he's been in lust several times, sometimes with girls he didn't even like. We've all been there. Sometimes with girls he did like, but he knew there was something missing. He didn't know what until now. He said there was something pure about his feelings for me, how in the past it's always been about sex, about outer beauty. But with me, it's about inner beauty as well. He said he found it difficult to put into words, but he wasn't doing so bad. Maybe he would just come up with a definition of love. What poets have been trying to do for centuries. The recognition of a person's inner beauty. That's exactly how I feel about him. Peter wondered if it was because we both like Sherlock Holmes and Doctor Who. I said, if we are being honest, that's a pretty big part of it. I didn't start presenting myself as deliberately androgynous until my mid-teens. Until then, being unconventional was just about doing my own thing. As a child, people said I was incredibly naughty. As a teenager, uncooperative, difficult. It was a constant battle between my determination to live life on my own terms and the efforts of my parents and teachers to force me to behave, to conform, to fit in, to be normal. I began to realize how gender labels prevent every one of us from reaching our true nature, and how they perpetuate a hierarchy based on nothing more than male physical strength. At the age of 15, I decided that the gender assigned to me was completely irrelevant. I have no desire to change my body. I don't wish I was born into a different sex. Actually, in some ways, my sex is also completely irrelevant. Not just because of my attitude to gender, there's also my fluid sexuality, which was never a problem for me. Why should it be? I was used to being an outsider. When I realized my sexuality was unusual, I just saw it as another manifestation of my lack of convention and so-called normality. But I cannot speak for people who feel their body is a reflection of their psychological gender. How could I? I don't have a psychological gender. I completely reject the notion. We do have something in common. Like them, I also face hostility and prejudice from all sides. We are attacked by the narrow-minded bigots who are simply uncomfortable with anyone who is in any way different to themselves. It's a visceral hatred. There is this look in their eyes of disgust and revulsion. We are also attacked by the gay people, especially those who feel that their identity is an expression of who they choose as their partner instead of who they are in themselves. They feel threatened by androgynous and transgender people, as if those who become trans women and trans men could have just instead chosen to be gay. Trans women are attacked by hardline feminists who think that only someone born female should be defined as a woman. But maybe no one should. Of course, both women and gays are still marginalized in many situations. But that doesn't compare to the hostility and prejudice that transgender people face, and the anguish they feel. It's a shocking statistic that about half of all transgender people have attempted suicide, and nearly all have considered it. More than anything, they need our kindness and understanding, and that's the last thing they're getting from most people. Peter has been very hesitant about introducing me to his friends and family. I told him I would like to meet the other important people in his life. He eventually gave in, so last night we met two of his closest friends, Sarah and Ron, in the Union Bar. When I arrived, we kissed, as per usual, and I could see this made Ron very uncomfortable. Sarah was very friendly, but Ron just grunted and started scrutinizing me as if I'm some kind of exhibit. He made some comment about how I've obviously gone to a hell lot of trouble to disguise my gender, and how it's a fucking odd thing to do. And Peter questioned his choice of language. He changed it to unusual. I said there is nothing wrong with unusual. I like unusual. He said it wasn't meant as a compliment. I asked him if he has a problem with me. He described me as unnatural, and how 99% of people would say I'm a deviant. I said I'm not interested in the 99% of people. I'm interested in Peter, and he's supposed to be Peter's friend, so why is it such a big problem for him? Cannot he think for himself, without referring to 99% of people? Hasn't he got a brain of his own inside his thick skull? I asked, where is Ron? Unique Ron, with Ron's own ideas, Ron's own beliefs, based on Ron's own experiences, Ron's own thoughts, no one else's. He went off. In a huff. I hope I didn't come on too strong. After all, he's Peter's friend. After the trouble with Ron, Peter was even more apprehensive about my meeting his parents. His mum knew something was up, so he would tell her he met someone special without being any more specific. When I arrived, Peter made the introductions and his mum gave me a hug, and his dad said he didn't know whether he should shake my hand or give me a peck on the cheek. I'm to call them Brian and Kath. Well, Brian immediately started asking about my name. I've told him I've always hated my given name. Why should we use the name our parents chose for us? Shouldn't we be able to choose for ourselves? Brian said it's not often Peter brings a partner home. Kath said she thinks it's a funny term, partner. Apparently she was once asked if she had a partner and she replied she's not in business. Brian said it's a word that's used nowadays and it covers a multitude of sins. He asked if I had any brothers or sisters. I mentioned my older sister and younger brother. He said, one of each then. I could see where Peter gets his sense of humor. Peter told him to stop taking the piss and suggested we go to his bedroom. It was exactly as I would imagined it. Lots of sci-fi novels, posters of vintage motorbikes, scattering of models, spaceships, robots, Daleks, such like. We sat on his bed. Peter noticed it's the first time we've been alone together. At least not in a public place. We kissed and he started to unbutton my jacket. I told him to stop. He said he wasn't thinking about going all the way, but part the way would be nice. I said not yet. I could see he was disappointed. He asked how I put up with all the grief, like with Ron and with his dad. He said that I want to ignore the issue of gender, but it ends up being the focus of my every interaction. That's not my fault. He said it's exactly because of the way I present myself and how his dad didn't even try to get to know me as a person. He mentioned how it's all his friends talk about and how everywhere we go people stare as if I'm got some strange disfigurement. He said we've been seeing each other for over 2 months and he still doesn't know my sex, and isn't it about time he found out? I told him I'm not ready for that. And I asked him to respect my wishes. He replied, what about his wishes? That his wishes are only motivated by curiosity and impatience. They don't deserve respect. He said he cannot hang around forever not knowing. I said maybe I should leave. He didn't even ask me to stay. Turns out Peter's just the same as everyone else. He won't accept me for myself. Things were going so well. I really wanted this to work. I've never felt this way about anyone before. And it's hard. It's so fucking hard. I had only been home a half an hour and Peter turned up. Apparently, after I left, he had a big row with his dad. Brian accused Peter of being deliberately ambiguous about me. Peter said he couldn't tell them my sex because he didn't know. Because he cannot tell any more than they can. Apparently, Kath asked if it had ever come up in a conversation. I wish I had been a fly on the wall. I opened a couple of beers and we sat down on the sofa. Peter apologized for his behavior in the bedroom. I said, what's the point in an apology if he meant what he said? He said he didn't mean it, he was just being a dick. Being impatient for us to get closer. Meaning to fuck. He said closer in other ways as well. Weren't we already close? In other ways? He said his impatience was clouding his judgment, that he really didn't care about my sex, it's more what it says about him. But Peter's got plenty of confidence. He obviously doesn't give a damn about what other people think of him. That's one of the things I like about him. When we met in the cafe, most men would have run a mile. And confidence usually comes from self-knowledge, so maybe our relationship has nothing to teach him about himself. Nothing he doesn't already know. But just because I wasn't ready, he had to fuck things up. He said that the one thing he's sure about is that he wants us to be together. He's obviously meant it. I showed him my latest photos, life studies of Carol and Julia. Some of them quite erotic, in an artistic sort of way. They are partners, but not in the business sense. He said if I would ever need someone to hold my exposure meter. I asked if they excited him. Images of two beautiful women together in that way. He said he was no different to most hot-blooded men. I said if he thought of himself as hot-blooded, he should prove it. He didn't need to be asked twice, and so now he knows. He didn't seem disappointed. I certainly wasn't. What Peter has done must be pretty unique. To fall in love with someone without knowing their sex. That's quite something. And I don't just mean sexual attraction. Peter really got to know me. And there was none of the baggage that comes with sex and with gender. I made sure of that. And he still fell in love. Now he knows. I wonder if the nature of our relationship will change. I hope not. But only time will tell.